So everything from the business areas I worked in, before leaders knew where they were taking you, suddenly they don't. Projects, you knew what you were going to do, suddenly you don't. Innovation, you knew which areas to innovate in, now you don't. So all the businessy bits. Then we looked at individuals, the team member. Before the boss told me what to do, now they want me to collaborate. What's that? And work with people in other departments. Then we looked at the way they were at home. We noticed their families were getting more complex. So every single topic I looked at, governments, their policies made no sense. They'd put a policy in and the world had changed, so the policy was obsolete before they'd actually executed it. But they carry on because that's our policy. And so I call it World After Midnight or New World Management. And that's how I got to that. It was literally a bit of inspiration from Ellie Goldratt, plus luck and digging to figure out what was going on.
I'm Ranjor, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Professor Eddie Obeng is a British organizational theorist, educator, and author who served as a professor at Henley Business School and Hult International Business School's Ashridge Executive Education. He also founded Pentacle, the virtual business school, and serves as its executive director. Professor Obeng has been described as a leading revolutionary and an adjunct provocateur by the Financial Times. In this conversation, we discuss how studying material science and observing the changes in modern business led him to his crucial insight that the world is now changing faster than we can catch up with our projections. How his insight unravels common wisdom in industry after industry, leading him to explore new ways of doing things. Why traditional hierarchies no longer make sense in a volatile, complex, and ambiguous world. How his insights inspired later development in design thinking. And how his thinking led him to create Cube, an interactive, virtual, super real world which allows organizations to shed their old world culture and thinking and experiment with collaborative, creative problem solving. This is just a taste of all that we discuss, and it is all very interesting. So let's jump right in with Professor Eddie Obeng. All right. I'm sitting here across the screen from Professor Eddie Obeng. Eddie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ran. Happy to be here.
Oh, nice. You said that right. So we usually start by hearing a little bit about the COVID situation where you are, just to make sure that I hear your experience in the past year with this chaos.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the UK, we've had a bit of a journey. Most of last year, people were locked down and they mostly complied and stayed at home and got very depressed and miserable and all the rest of the things which come with that. And yeah, things started getting back to normal. Then they locked us down again this year. So businesses have gone bust because they've put in startup capital and then it's all just evaporated. At the moment, though, we have a football match going on. All the things like social distancing, they're not real things anymore. But despite all of that, we've not had resurgence or anything else like that. They keep threatening us with a new variant, but the numbers at least the numbers I look at, look quite safe and secure.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and the latest numbers from Israel came out that the Delta strain, the vaccine is only 64% effective against the Delta strain.
Less than whiskey.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of ethical dilemma because pre-COVID, you drove your car safely, okay, but you didn't say, I'm not driving my car in case somebody steps out in front of me. That was like the norm, wasn't it? And then with COVID, we've shifted our ethical position to be responsible for people stepping out in front of the car. It's absolutely fascinating scenario to be in. And I'm not a philosopher, but I'd love to know what philosophers thought about the way in which we've made that transition. It's very subtle, but it's very critical. In reality, you shouldn't go back to driving your car. And many other things which we do. You don't go, I'm not going to eat this meal because somebody I go out in the rain to farm it. You know, so it's a really We sort of assume they do what they do, we eat what we eat and drive what we drive, and thumbs up. We've done that all along. And then this has really changed the landscape of humanity. It's fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah. It's these interrelations. It's very similar to the stuff that we'll get to with the effects of technology and the internet. Is everything is interconnected, right?
Yes, exactly. And all the same ethical questions and complicated ones, and basically rethinking what human beings are and what they mean as human beings. Those are elements which are quite crucial as well.
So has COVID affected your work much?
Yes, it has. So for about the past 10 years, I've been teaching face-to-face, doing keynotes, traveling around the world, but also my alter ego is an avatar. I built a super real world, and I use that for most of the teaching I used to do in a business school. So for 10 years, I've been an avatar, quite happily teaching all the class, people walking around and stuff like that. COVID came along, and everyone decided that they instantly knew how to work virtually. What they meant was we're going to use video conferencing and WebEx. So we suddenly discovered lots of people were interested, and they'd come in and we'd say, this is how we work. And go, but you can't see the webcams all the time. So how does it work? And so what's funny is for 10 years, we'd been ahead of the world. And then suddenly the world decided it was ahead of us. And then after about 6 months, they said, we're really tired, looking at all these faces on Zoom all the time. And we can't get anything done because all we do is look at each other. We don't write things down. We can't work on a whiteboard. And I said, that was what I was trying to tell you about. And they're going, oh, that's what you were saying.
That's funny.
So yeah, it did affect us quite dramatically. But business-wise, my team have always been working virtually anyway. We had an office, but we used to use it just for workshops. So internal to the business, no. Yeah, those are the main things. So a couple of my team members in Australia, for example, have been locked down, a bit miserable, but apart from that.
Yeah, interesting. It's been, for me, I've been working on Zoom for, I don't know, since there was Zoom.
And VC fits perfectly what you do, doesn't it? Absolutely spot on.
Yeah, and then it's been maybe a year, almost a year into lockdowns and stuff, that we really got tired of it. And one of the most advanced groups that I participate in, it's a group of makers. They did an event on Mozilla Hubs, which is
I know Mozilla Hubs.
Yeah. And it was refreshing and it was fun. It felt like we were actually there. And so I'm sure we'll get to Cubed and everything you do with that.
Yeah. Mozilla Hubs is really cool. It's fun as well. So it's got little avatars and it's fun stuff. Yeah, my stuff is a bit more serious than that. But
I spent a good time on my avatars this year, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're an extrovert, aren't you?
I guess so. I don't.
Yes,
I think I'm both extremes.
Okay. But if you're a real introvert, when you're asked to create your avatar, you hate it. You hate that experience. So everyone who says, I love making my avatar, I go, extrovert. You probably give them extra long dreadlocks and all these other things.
Oh, no. I just try to make it like as similar to myself as possible. That was my jam.
So you're a good-looking extrovert.
Okay.
If you weren't a good-looking extrovert, you wouldn't make it look like you. Or maybe you would.
I'm not going to win this one, am I? So I want to start the more serious conversation, we found this question that I really like that helps find patterns in the person's life and then connect us with what they do today. And so the question is, what's something you learned early in life or in childhood that still drives you today, that you still hold?
There are lots of things which I often refer to even now. When I was younger, one of my mum's mottos was, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And as an entrepreneur, that has been just brilliant, because everything you do messes up the first time, second time, third time, usually 12 times. So that's something which I think has come through. I was born in Ghana. That's where I was born. Obviously, I'm British now, but I've lived here more of my life than I lived in Ghana. I was born in Ghana. And in Ghana, in the olden days, when a baby was born, because they were never sure, infant mortality, that whether the child was going to survive, they would not name it for about 8 days, just in case. Because if you name something and it dies, you're more miserable than if you don't. And then after about 8 days, they had this ceremony called an outdooring. You might recognize this type of thing, where they would present the baby to the world. And somebody would say wise words. And the wise words which were given to me were, the chap who did it, he said, this is a door and that's a window. If you can't get in through the door, get in through the window. So that's like my personal motto. And that's also been quite useful because most of what I'm doing is thought leadership. I really am. I'm not just, people say, I'm a thought leader. And they say, oh, so what do you, I had a funny one the other day. This chap was talking about, I'm a thought leader in Agile. And I said, oh, great, I really want that. I said, can you come and talk on my course? We've got like a 17-minute slot and I need you to do these things. And he said, oh, my presentations, one is 1 hour, one is 1.5 hours. And these are the topics I cover. just told me you're a thought leader.
It's not a thought leader.
What is that?
That's funny.
So it is funny. I get that all my life. So generally, I have to go through the window because when I start explaining things to people, their eyes go like swivelly because they've never thought of it that way before. I did it to you just now by saying you're an extrovert, and that's why you liked your avatar.
Yeah. No, that's a great connection. And actually, so studying, I've been getting familiar with you more in recent months, and it's breathtaking. Like the kind of, you deal with everything. So it's business, but it's also psychology,
yes,
and evolutionary biology,
yes,
and neuroscience, and
yeah,
doing all of these integration. How do you think of what you do today? What was the title that you give to it, if at all?
Yeah, so I was quite lucky. I worked at a business school called Ashridge, and they had this policy where you had to teach for the business school 4 days and you got 1 day off. Okay. And you could do whatever you wanted. And most people use that for doing consultancy work and making money, which I did as well. But that gives you a certain independence in terms of what research and what things you do. So that's the first thing. I was just lucky to go into that role. As part of that, one of the things I did was I was trying to understand, I was teaching, they'd hired me to teach operations management and projects and stuff. Actually, the operations management stuff. And I bumped into a chap whose name was Ellie Goldratt. He wrote a book called The Goal. And I still met him and I listened to him, and smart guy. Unfortunately, he's dead. But he was talking about manufacturing, what's changing in manufacturing and so on. And so I started reading more and more. And one of the things I noticed was that, excuse me, in most industry areas, the pace of change was accelerating. And I had an experience where I went to see a company and they made ceramic goods, okay? And I was talking to the technical director and he said, I don't know what to do. But the new dryers are different from the old dryers. In the old days, we just put it into a thing and put some twigs and sticks underneath and heated it up and it worked. Now they have these things called microwave dryers. And I don't know how to do the cost benefits. And so things like that highlighted for me that the world was changing and not always in directions people understood. And then I kept watching, and I had another situation where a chap came from a bank and they'd run a project and they failed, they couldn't understand it, and lots of different things like that. And I worked out the world was accelerating. It was going faster and faster, getting more complex, getting more interdependent. But when I looked at all my clients and everyone else, their ability to learn was quite flat. So you had the world accelerating exponentially with the number of people and the complexity and the interactions, and no change to the learning, no change to the way organizations were responding. The lines are going to cross over. So the first time I taught this piece, I was after I collected the research data, and I ended up naming it. I said, this bit is like before midnight, and that bit's after midnight, because it's like it's switched and people didn't notice. So I call it World After Midnight, what I work on. And it dawned on me that literally everything was broken. So everything from the business areas I worked in, before leaders knew where they were taking you, suddenly they don't. Projects, you knew what you were going to do, suddenly you don't. Innovation, you knew which areas to innovate in, now you don't. So all the businessy bits. Then we looked at individuals, the team member. Before the boss told me what to do, now they want me to collaborate. What's that? And work with people in other departments. Then we looked at the way they were at home. We noticed their families were getting more complex. So every single topic I looked at, governments, their policies made no sense. They'd put a policy in and the world had changed, so the policy was obsolete before they'd actually executed it. But they carry on because that's our policy. And so I call it World After Midnight or New World Management. And that's how I got to that. It was literally a bit of inspiration from Ellie Goldratt, plus luck and digging to figure out what was going on.
Yeah. And if we can dive into this World After Midnight a little bit, it seems like there's this word that I recently learned, VUCA, right? I read about this in Team of Teams from General Stanley McChrystal. But the world becoming more interconnected, and that makes it more is it volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and
ambiguity?
Yeah. So is that the same as what you call WHAM? Is it? How would you?
So I think where the breakthrough I made which is why I was then able to set up my own business school and everything else is. VUCA is describing that acceleration I said of the world. Complexity, more people involved, uncertainty, surprise. So what VUCA is describing the environment, okay? Now, what I noticed was the environment relative to how we respond to it. And that's important because if you can learn fast and the world is changing, what do you care if it's a VUCA world? It's volatile, but you're on top of things, so big deal. The reason it's a problem is because the volatility, uncertainty, and pace and interconnectedness has outstripped your ability to understand or even to see know what you're looking at so you can see it. That's the problem. So there are tons of books on VUCA, which is great, but they all miss the point. The point is not VUCA. The point is VUCA compared to understanding, seeing, learning. Because as long as you can learn faster than VUCA, who cares? The world hasn't realized those relative bits. But it's actually funnier than that because there are three things which happen at the same time. And VUCA confuses them. The first is about the pace of change and the scope and the complexity. And that's what I talk about in my TED talk. But the second one is also what I call ability to understand and the growth of cyberspace. So things like cyberspace, the amount of data has also grown exponentially, but our ability to understand the patterns is quite flat. So that's why all this digital stuff confuses us, because people say things like, I went to Amazon and they tried to sell me something they bought yesterday and they can't understand what's going on. And the algorithms are scuttling around trying to break that particular barrier. So that's the second one. And at the same time as that happened, also there's a third element, which is quite crucial, which is the move from physical world to virtual world. They work to different rules. So if you look at heights, there's an average height for human beings, X. If you look at anything which is non-physical, wealth, intelligence of humanish, there's no sensible average. So a lot of those things are also broken. So all these relative shifts have happened, and that's what underpins the world after midnight. It basically means that almost everything you thought about how things should work, which you learned from being a kid, if you're more than 30 years old, all of those assumptions are probably wrong.
Yeah.
So assuming the grown-ups will know more than you, probably wrong. You just list it, right? The way of society, assuming your business can have a strategy, probably wrong. And.
Yeah.
The heuristics are all completely broken.
Yeah. It's interesting because the VUCA model it's almost like a trend. It just becomes more and more uncertain.
Just a trend.
But with your addition, there was this switch, this moment of this binary.
That's it.
Moment, which is very interesting.
Because of the relative things. Now, another piece of luck, I studied engineering at college, and that's my TED talk, you probably saw that. But in engineering, one of the ways they get you to think is using what they call dimensionless numbers. So what's a dimension? A dimension might be length. So if you divide one length by another length, you get something meaningful. You with me? But if you divide your weight by your length, your height, it's not necessarily useful.
Right.
So dimensional numbers are combinations of numbers which have meaning. What I learned in my engineering was that if you have a dimensionless number, there are many of them, they tend to do this flipping thing. They get to a certain number, and then all of a sudden you get turbulence. All of a sudden, instead of going up, the droplets go down, and so on. So that understanding of that element of the physical world, I then used in looking at the business environment and the world environment. So that's what the flip is, realizing that when you combine the pace of change, the complexity, the density of interaction, you get to a certain point where the number flips. And that was really quite crucial. And the way I checked it was real was I took what we were teaching at business school, and I said, if the world really is changing faster and cyberspace really is growing faster, and we've got more of this transition to virtual space and so on and so forth, then when I take one of the things we're teaching, I should be able to reinvent it, and it should work better than it does in the MBA textbooks. Do you see what I mean? Because if I'm right, then the MBA textbooks are teaching something which doesn't work. And okay, so the first one which I took was change, projects. And I said, they've taught us how projects work in a beginning, a middle, and then make your plan, blah, blah, blah. And I said, what happens if the world's changing faster and you can learn? Some projects, you'll deliver the project before you figure out what you were doing. Because when you start, you're not clear on what you're doing. When you you're not sure how to do it. You're making up as you go along. There's a problem which has to be solved, but nobody can articulate it, and you're all struggling. It's like walking through the fog, one step at a time. Oh, we've arrived.
Yep.
So I went, okay, let's see whether those exist. And I could find them. And if I told people to do it one step at a time, they perform better than when they did it the other way. So I checked my assumption using that.
Interesting. That's fascinating. And so we're going to get into the business side of things, because I come from also a startup background, and the business side makes a lot of sense to me as someone who's doing lean and agile and all those keywords to not overplan.
Yes.
But I'm interested to hear, what did you find was the effect on individuals and their, or in individual lives?
Stress.
Yeah.
So when I began teaching World After Midnight, I used to often run a session. It was a really simple session, it lasted about 45 minutes. I'd ask people what was happening in the world. They'd come up with the VUCA curve. They'd say, yeah, it is going faster. Someone would say, no, it's the same as before. And then someone would say, how can you say that? We had to replan 4 times last week and I was up all night. Well, so they'll argue amongst themselves. So they get that accelerating curve. And then I'd ask them, can you do things your boss doesn't let you? And how's your strategy and how often? And so we get the horizontal curve. And then I would say, okay, let's build a business designed for the old world. And I know you're good people, so just play along with me. I want you to be greedy capitalists, okay? Not nice capitalists, really greedy capitalists, okay? And you wake up in the morning, what's the first thought in your mind? Everyone goes, money. Okay, what's the second thought? More money. Third thought, how am I going to get the money? Okay, old world, how do you get the money? Do more of what you're doing now. That's the safest way. So they discuss it. Do something new. Somebody said, no, that's too dangerous. Do what we're doing now. Then we'd come to that conclusion, more of the same is good. Then I say, so how do you do more of the same? Who would you recruit? People like the people I currently employ. What would you tell them to do? I would tell them exactly what to do, because I did it yesterday. And we'd build basically a hierarchical organization like the one they lived in.
Right.
And then I play games like, and so what happens when a customer comes along and asks you for something you can't do? We have to hide. And then they giggle, because that was what they were doing in real life. And then I'd say, okay, and what happens if, as I used to do this, I used to call it Fred and Bob. And I'd have them in different departments. I say, Fred's gone and done something because the customer wanted it, okay? But it affects Bob. And Bob's really messed around. So what does Bob do? Does he complain to Fred? And everyone would laugh. They go, no, you go to your boss. So he goes to his boss. So does the boss complain to Fred? No, because then Fred's boss will be pissed off. So he goes up and up until it comes to the common point. And they're busy. So they send down 2 lightning bolts. One zaps Fred, one zaps Bill, okay, or Bob, whatever his name is. So what do they learn from that? One learns, don't do anything. It's just a waste of time. The other one learns, if there's a problem, don't mention it. It just comes back and bites you. But they all learn, wait for an opportunity to get revenge on that bastard who got me into trouble, okay? Wow. And the whole course would just burst out laughing because I described their lives. Yeah. And then they would say, when we started talking about After Midnight, they'd say, I thought I was the crazy person. Now you've helped me see that I'm stuck in an environment which is working to something else, and I'm just standing up as a victim of the fact that world hasn't moved on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the effect in the classroom. I remember I did one session once, and one of the women who was on the course came up to me and said, now I understand why my family is struggling so hard to stay together. Because we're all different things. We haven't changed the way we structure. She just played back her family, old world, new world to me. And I went, okay, but you can see it. Pace of change, the husband's working abroad. You can literally see it. When we're trying to work the same way, we're trying to have meals around the table and nobody can make it, and everyone's fed up. You can hear the arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite interesting though.
I'm thinking about like the heightened connections, the connectivity of everything, and how it's affected our culture in some ways, right? And where every conversation is global now. So we're much more policing each other's words and thoughts, because everyone, you're no longer just talking to a few people in your room. You're now talking to the whole world, and someone is going to get offended. And then I'll just throw one more example out there, and then I'll let you respond. But do you know Bo Burnham? He's a very popular comedian. He just came out with he sings songs, and he just came out with a Netflix special, but he has a song about the internet. It's called Welcome to the Internet. And the chorus is, could I interest you in everything all of the time?
That's lovely. That's really good. That's a real description of it. So if you're running a business and you're trying to innovate, okay, and you want a highly innovative business, You almost empower the individual engineers. I mean, this is what lots of the startup people have Googled it. You empower the individual engineers. They all come up with their own little ideas, and then there's an ecosystem of ideas, and therefore something good comes out. If you're a company who's trying to squash innovation, then you hold on to the budgets and you make everyone present to the whole board, because there's no way the whole board will ever agree on anything. For a start, if it's really novel, the finance guy's going to kill it. The HR guy's going to say, I've never seen anything like it before. It's never going to fly. It's just a disaster. Okay. That's what we've done with the world. Every single idea goes to the main global board, who then pours cold water all over it.
Yeah.
So that's why thought leadership, I believe, has stalled. It's all consensus leader. Somebody, one of the things I was interviewed earlier, somebody said, what do you think of hybrid working? Have you heard of hybrid working?
Sure.
Okay, it's this idea that after COVID, we're going to do hybrid working now, where people go into the office for a certain number of days, and then stay away for a certain number of other days. It's nonsense. Because the question is, why are they going to the office? Why are they staying away? Is this how when did the average ever become the best way of pushing productivity, performance, and people's enjoyment? It's never happened in the history of humans, okay?
Yeah.
So, but it's what? So some consultant somewhere went, what do we sell? What do we sell? I don't know. We've got nothing to sell. There's nothing new. I know. Let's come up with words. And they've been playing this game for a long time. Let's come up with hybrid is good. Hybrid is good. Okay, what's up? Hybrid working. Hybrid. And everyone, because they can't think, because it's a global world. So if you say, no, that's not hybrid, everyone will pile on you and say what an idiot you are, okay? Or you've offended somebody. I would like to be hybrid. You're saying you're anti-hybrid.
That's funny.
Okay, so they all pile in. And I, being the idiot I am, I say, that's just nuts. What's the problem you're trying to solve? The problem you're trying to solve is how to get people to be human, even though they're not all in the same place all the time.
Right.
Okay, that's what we're trying to do. We tried to do that when people were in offices. It didn't work. You go to the office, you sit at your desk and type an email to the person next to you. So we weren't around the water cooler. We weren't doing it. But that's what you want. You want the culture of the organization. So you want people to at least have a meal and a laugh together. Great, okay. That's the problem. So how do we solve that problem? Not how do we decide what percentage they should be in the office? It's nonsense. But I can tell you honestly, if you go on the internet and you Google, how do I solve work from home, remote work, office work, other work, hybrid? And I say, no, it's multimodal. It's different modes for different people. What's important is, can you get them to connect? Can you get them to feel emotional? To get them to feel socially engaged? But the whole world will spend millions, maybe billions, solving this crazy problem. And that's what you've just described.
Yeah.
That you have to have either be really stupid like me, or have the courage of your convictions, which we've never seen, to actually put out anything new today.
Yeah, there's a lot of unjustified criticism of everything, and everything has to stand up to every possible standard at the same time.
It does.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I know it is, but it's inevitable. So here's the thing to which I comfort myself with. In the tribe, okay, if the tribe were all crazy people, you have a problem, okay? Because they'll all be doing different things. They eat berries, which they shouldn't. They all die. So in the tribe, there'll be one or two whose genes or whatever it is, situation or whatever, they're a bit crazy, okay? And they're basically, I think the Native Americans, what do they call them? Contrarians. They go and do crazy things, okay? And they might eat the wrong beads, but they might eat something tasty, then the whole tribe learns.
Right.
Now, as you said before, when we were lots and lots of little tribes, we could find out all these tasty beans, and a few people ate the horrible ones and felt very sick.
Yep.
But with the internet, can't. But the downside is not true. The downside is not the same as the upside. Or the upside is not the same as the downside. What I'm saying is, we can't innovate to solve real problems. It doesn't mean we can't mess ourselves up to address and get excited about nonsensical problems.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
It doesn't, you don't get saved by the internet. What happens is whatever emerges early as looking like a consensus ends up gaining momentum, even though it's probably wrong, because most things are usually wrong. Statistics of innovating successfully, 1 in 100,000.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting that the internet, yeah, while it's undermined the smart people's ability to plan and organize, it gave incredible tools of self-organization to the dumbest,
Correct.
most unthoughtful people around, and made them very often more effective than the scientists and the
Correct.
people.
Exactly. But it's exactly that. And it makes sense that it should happen that way. If you had to have brain surgery, okay, you wouldn't do brain surgery by democracy, would you? You
Of
wouldn't
course
do it
not.
by popular votes. I always have my brain. Who thinks they should open this side? No, of course not. You go to the person who's most skilled, who's done it the most.
Yep.
But what happens with things like the internet is you end up with the loudest voices happening. And then it's worse than that, because as we've begun to understand how people's minds work, it means that actors, I'll call them bad actors, good actors, can actually create things which aren't right or which aren't real, and everyone joins in. So there's a problem with being human, which is in your head, you make sense to yourself. And the reason is, my view, billions of years ago, okay, you had to avoid the tigers and the lions coming for you. Okay, so software is written into your neck. There's a piece of software here with your amygdala, which means when there's a loud noise, it goes, whoa, switches off your logical brain, etc., etc. But what's funnier about that is that you think you're one person responding to that, but you're not. You're multiple. You got left hemisphere, right hemisphere. That's two processes. Your heart has its own little knot of things. Your stomach has its own little bits. Your brain doesn't tell your heart beat, 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 beat. There are different multiple processing centers linked by the vagus nerve, and you think you're one person because you have to think of yourself as one person. Because when that saber-tooth tiger comes at you, that thing, which is you put together, your ego, your persona, your logos, whatever it is, has to go, I've got to run because I'm worth it.
Right.
If you don't say, I'm worth it, you don't run, you get eaten, your ancestors died, you're not here. Yep. So if you're here, your ancestors ran away because their egos told them they're worth it and they should struggle to stay alive. From that point on, as a human being, you're doomed. It's a huge flaw because your ancestors are the ones who survived. So they didn't survive to see reality. They survived because they responded. They actually can't see reality as a human being. You can't do that. So what happens is, okay, firstly, you see something, and you'll see this with kids. They look at it, then they touch it. Why? Because two senses is better than one, because they don't know if it's real or not, okay? Right. Then they'll lick it. Three senses is better than two. And then they might try to swallow it or listen to it. You with me? Right. Use multiple senses to try and see reality. Because reality is hard for us to see. We never evolved for that. Then you live in a complex society. And a few people finally go, we worked out how the sun works. Basically, it's a man in a chariot who has a ball of fire, and he rides across the sky. And everyone goes, oh, that's all right then. And they carry on for another 4,000 generations. Because everyone knows how it works.
Story. Yeah,
great. Yeah. And then somebody goes, no, that's not what happens at all. And they come up with a different story. And they keep arguing. And then finally they go, oh no, the earth goes around the sun. But here's the funny thing. It looks the same both ways. Right. If the earth goes around the sun, if the sun goes around, they both look exactly the same. Yeah, so even though you're observing it, you can't touch it, you would come to the conclusion it's the chariot man.
Yeah.
Because they look the same.
There's a TED Talk I love about being wrong. And she said, being wrong, what does being wrong feels like? It feels like being right.
That's great. That's a good line. It's exactly that, because you have no idea. And what's funnier is you say to me, so it's not this. It's not the sun. Whenever I say it's the sun, Earth goes around the sun, everyone nods, and I go, no. The reason it looks that way is because the Earth is rotating. So there's two explanations. Right. Are you with me? Which would all look exactly the same as the sun god. So why am I telling you this? We have no clue what reality looks like. So we interpret it in different ways. One of the safest ways is you look at what all the other monkeys are doing and you copy them. Right. Okay. So if they haven't died, they're eating that, you eat it. So that's why social acceptance is so important. You asked me about COVID. The moment people started wearing masks, you with me? When no one's wearing masks, I was looking around. I'm not wearing a mask. Put it. Oh, yes, I've got one. Oh, yes, me, I'm good too. So we can't help it but do it because that's the best heuristic. And if you're a bad actor, you can use that for marketing products people don't want or whatever you want. As long as you can persuade them other people are doing it, they leap on the bandwagon and they don't know why, because there is no reason why, because it's not a logical decision.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right about that. So let's talk about how organizations need to change in response to this idea of midnight and this idea of change being faster than your ability to learn. And then one thing that from General McChrystal, is the strict hierarchies no longer work, right? How would you kind of describe what organizations need to learn and what leadership looks like in this new world?
Yeah, I think I have watched the General McChrystal talk, but I can't remember it, to be honest. But does he explain why hierarchies no longer work? Because people often just say, hierarchies never work. We have to be flexible. We have to be agile. But has he explained the science, not the philosophy and it's good to do it?
I think
the science is very simple.
Yeah, he comes at it from being on the ground and noticing so from Al-Qaeda, it moves much.
Point of view. Okay, yeah. So here's the science as well, in terms of the way I researched it was, I started looking at boards, so decision-making senior people in the organization, okay? And what I realized was the ways in which information reaches them and the way in which they have discourse and discuss and then pass on decisions, a lot of that is through reading, but a lot of it is, the time is also through talking, like we're doing now. When you talk, you're talking about, I think, 1 megabit per second, something like that. Okay, so talking is a really slow way of passing data across. But if the whole world is talking, it's fine. If the whole world is just talking, then me sending you a letter which takes a week is okay, because my words are in there. You can read them faster than I speak, and you can catch up.
Right.
You got it. So for most of our history, until we hit this bloody cyberspace thing, talking was great. Then we hit the cyberspace thing. Suddenly the information can flow around the organization 1,000 times faster, inside the organization 1,000 times faster. It means you can never provide the senior decision makers in your hierarchy with the data they need to add to the questions they have to formulate in order to produce the answers, which will then guide people in terms of what to do. You literally can't do it. It's a bottleneck.
Yeah.
And at that point, that was the death of the hierarchy. So again, it's like VUCA. People just go, oh, we'd be more flexible. And they just, but there's science behind it. There's a reason that the hierarchy is finished. And if you're in a slow-moving environment with very few decisions, hierarchy, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what's basically happened. And then you have to figure out, how do we do it? So if we use your idea of the terrorists or the guerrillas, they have small cells, but they connect 1 or 2 people in the cells. So the conversation is between these 2, and the slower conversations here, but it's fast between the different cells. That's how they do it.
Right.
So only the crucial information flows between the different cells, not all the information. They don't say, here are all our customer data. Now here's my PowerPoint. They just say the one thing you need to know is the bad guys are over there. Right. That's all they do. So again, question plus data equals information. And we lost that as well. Because once we started calling it information technology, we fooled ourselves. That information and data are not the same. They're not the same thing. Can I diverge a bit? I did a conference once and I had 3,000 information professionals and I was going up to speak. And I walked on stage and I said to them, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here because I'm a fraud. I don't know what information is. Can you help me? What's information? So, of course, you can see their necks stiffen. And I said, okay, if I said 42, is that information? Put your hand up. So a few reluctant hands went up, but not all of them. So I have just proved they don't know either. So I said, okay, 42 years, is that information? Hands which up went down, others went up. So they really don't have a clue. Right. I said, 42 years. Somebody said, 42 years what? What? I said, 40 years old. Is that information? Now all the hands were down. They didn't know what to do. I said, what's missing? And somebody said, what's 42 years old? I said, quite perfect. Question, how old are you, Eddie? Answer, 42 years old. Question plus data equals information. But I'm not 42 years old. So although it's information, it's wrong and totally useless to you. And if you act on it, you're in trouble. And then they burst out laughing. But we've made that mistake as well. So there's so much work to be done. It's just so much work to be done to help people get more balanced lives.
Yeah. And we're talking about enacting change and allowing change to happen in a faster way, in a less hierarchical way.
More human.
Yeah, more
Yes.
human way. How do we achieve that, especially in an organization that's not done that before?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So what I'll tell you what I've tried and what's worked and what hasn't worked. So I've tried to get people to move, but I know that there's an element of learning because you have to learn a new way to do things. You have to unlearn and leave behind other things. So the way I try and describe it is you've got sort of a caterpillar and you've got a butterfly.
Yeah.
And always remember that in a world like World After Midnight, which has flipped, it's not change, it's transformation. That's why I've chosen a caterpillar and a butterfly. And you have to realize that a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings, okay?
Yeah.
Why is that important? Because everything which is important to the caterpillar is irrelevant to the butterfly. And you don't pay a caterpillar to give you flying lessons.
Right. That's very important.
So learning is going to be important. But you can make the caterpillar fatter, safer, more likely to build its cocoon, more likely to be able to get its scaffolding around it and learn and dissolve and become a butterfly. So to transition your organization, that's what you need to do. So they need to learn new stuff, lose old stuff, do stuff, put new systems in, put different ways of working and different ways of engaging people, work it out, figure out what butterflying looks like, build those capabilities, encourage people, put the structures in, processes, etc., and then they can cope with this new world. So that's what I tried to do. I think most organizations say they want to become butterflies, but they don't. They just want to be fatter caterpillars.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing as well, because if I can take some of the misery out of the people in the hierarchy who are being squished, that's positive. So I do teaching. I'll teach them how to think new world. I built a whole curriculum on the idea that if you're in a new world, if I'm teaching you how to do something and it takes me more than 15 minutes for me to teach you and you apply it, it's pointless. So you work with startups.
Sure.
So often in a startup, you have to put together a business case of some sort.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Sometimes. How long does that take?
I guess for us, we work in sprints. So we work in very short bursts of time. We do it all in workshop form.
So how long? 1 day, half a day?
5 days, yeah.
5 days.
Yeah.
So if I told you I could help you to build a business case in 7 minutes, would you be interested?
Sure.
So just go back to what I was saying about the old and new world. And when I mentioned about getting the MBA stuff and looking at the foggy projects, I have this method called a bubble diagram. I learned it from Ellie Goldratt. It's a root cause effect methodology. And so I applied that and say, why can't we build a business case faster? And basically what it said was, because we don't know what the elements are in the right order. So I came up with this thing called a gap leap. So what I would do if I was there with your colleagues, I'd get a flip chart and I'd draw a horizontal line halfway down it. I'd split the top in half. On one side, I'd write the words, if not fixed. On the other side, I'd write, if fixed. And I'd say, right, the world does not have your new startup product. What happens if we don't fix this? Everyone wants sticky each. And they capture them. I said, great, your business is kicked off. Everything's going well. What happens if you've done it? They write that as well. Usually they're not the opposites. Okay. And the reason you're doing that is because that gives them it gives them an idea. If they do nothing, what happens? Because the world's changing. If you do nothing, there's downside or upside. Okay. But the gap between the two, now we can start to put money against it. So how much is the impact of doing nothing? How much is the impact of doing something? Now we have the value at stake. Then I write, okay, so why haven't we done it yet? And you say, because we haven't had a meeting, we haven't done it. And you list all those things. I shuffle the stickies around. They go in a timeline. And that's your execution plan. And then we count the cost of doing those things, divide one by the other. 7 minutes if you're fast, 15 minutes if you're novice, ka-ching. Business plan, everyone buys into, always works. Yeah, I focused on trying to do concrete things to build for this. So when you say, how do you transition them? They honestly need to learn different ways of working, dramatically different.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about the difference between leadership and management, and I don't know that I've ever had a manager because I always worked for very small teams. Maybe the first time that I've experienced a manager is after we got acquired by a large corporation,
and
I left after a while. Yeah, but it was like, oh wow, there's people who. What is the difference and how do we become leaders How do you?
Yeah, it's a big challenge because, again, people are messing around with the words in the same way as they come up with hybrid. So what happened was management development, you could only charge, I don't know, $1,000 for that, okay? We'd have the same joke with strategy. You've got a marketing course. It's pretty rubbish, okay?
Yeah.
You call it strategic marketing, same course. You could charge 5 times as much. It's the same problem.
We do strategic design. That's for largely.
So when we had the reporting lines like that, okay, the reason we had the reporting lines is because the person at the top had done the job before and could tell the next one how to do it.
Yeah.
Old world, okay, and so on and so forth. So you had reporting lines. That concept, that set of words, reporting lines, is 400 years old. It goes back to the Navy. You have to understand that. So what happens in the Navy is it's noisy. So you're on a ship, captain wants to give an order, no one can hear them. So he passes the order to the first officer, lash the arm to the crew kringle, and it goes down the chain of command. Have you heard those words?
Sure.
To the guy doing the work. He does the work. Then he has to report back. Have you heard those words?
Sure.
So that they can move the next rope. So that's how it worked on ships. We still do that today, 400 years later. Okay. So in that process, what happened was somebody had to keep an eye on the person lashing the rope and make sure they'd done it. So this chain of command meant that you had somebody managing maybe 2 or 3 people. So you got the power and the authority to tell them what to do, to pay this, etc. So that was what management was about. The only place where you decided, should we go left or should we go right, was at the captain, right at the top. So all the leadership was at the top. They led. They said, and if the people wouldn't follow you, they'd mutiny you and throw you overboard. So for years, the leader was at the top. But as people discovered they could make more money by calling everyone leader, they started saying things like the leadership team, the senior leadership group. He's a senior leader. And they started putting job titles, senior leader. No, a leader is somebody who's followed. It's not a job title. You with me? So people doing management, which is about allocating resources, checking on quality, all the things about is the knot well tied, they suddenly got the title leader. And you would be there tying your knots, and they say, that's not how it's tied. And you say, you're not leading me. No, of course they're not, because they're managers, just the job title. Right. So the world has confused itself by just shuffling words around. So real leadership is about things get done even though no orders are given. And for that to happen, people have to want to follow you so they can pay attention. They usually follow you because they want to be included in what you're doing, or with their friends. They want to be motivated. They love the vision or the direction you're taking them in. They're learning from you. Then they follow you. And you can get anyone to follow you, even if they're senior to you. So I know lots of people who are enthusiastic and quite junior, and the senior team will follow them in terms of strategy. It's not a position.
Yeah. An interesting distinction. And I now that I'm thinking about it more deeply, I was a manager because I was a product manager and a project manager early in my career, and sometimes leader, but sometimes not.
Leader, but the job was project manager. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you would be new and you'd lead, and sometimes if you came across a new language and only one of the people in your group knew how to do it, or a new algorithm, you'd let them lead. You'd say, help us go in the right direction. And they'd try and explain it. And then you'd use your managerial authority to persuade everyone else to follow the lead of the person.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being a manager. You can be a really good manager. But some people are really rubbish managers. But worse, sometimes they're good managers, but they were good managers in the old world. And there's the same behaviors and everything's changed.
Yeah, and now they're neither good managers nor good leaders.
Correct.
So how do I? So I have my own business now, and I have a few people working for me. And so this may be a selfish question. I sometimes struggle with being a good leader because I think maybe my tendency is to be too hands off. So my tendency is, okay, this is what I want, go do it, don't bother me. And that's not always enough.
No. So here's a trick for being a very effective leader. The first question you ask yourself is, we're not talking transformation, we're talking about change. So just normal work.
Yeah.
So I mentioned foggy change, where you didn't know what and you didn't know how. Imagine somebody's doing something, they don't know what, they don't know how. Do they feel in their gut?
Uncertain, not so stable. Yeah.
Great. So imagine that you're leading somebody who's feeling like that. How often do you need to touch base with them?
Probably more often.
How much do you have to help them think about what the problem could be and play it back to them and have a safe sounding board.
Or
Would you
often did I
follow
do-
anyone through the fog you didn't trust?
Would
You
I-
have to have their trust.
Yeah,
So you have to
yeah.
always have done what you said you were going to do and
Yeah.
built up a good credibility with it. But there are other types of change. Imagine you know what, and how do you feel?
I feel pretty good.
It's like painting by numbers. Just tell me the numbers, I'll paint them. How often do you need to check in with that person?
Probably not very often.
How pissed off will they get if you do check in on them?
They will probably see it as intrusion.
And the list goes on.
Right.
There's a third one where you know what to do, but you have no clue how to do it. How do you feel?
I know what to do. I think in my case, I feel excited, but I can see someone else feeling not very good. Yeah.
So, as a leader, how much passion and energy do you have to bring to the table every time you come to talk to them to remind them how great what they're doing is?
Oh, yeah.
You're starting to understand. And then, of course, the last combination is everyone knows how to do it, but nobody's sure exactly what it should look like. Who's doing the listening? Who's doing the checking? Who's doing the making sure it all ties together? So those would be the hints that I would put to you to say, think first about the situation, and then think from the follower's point of view what they need from you. And then you'll get it right. Because the hands-off bit is great if everything's paid by numbers, but it's a bit more not so good if it isn't.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. I have two questions for you before we wrap up, and then I'll let you maybe say anything additional. But I'm a designer and a product designer. We do a lot of design thinking workshops, design sprints, and I know you've worked with IDEO for a little bit, and a lot of what you're saying sounds progressing by doing, sounds like design thinking, sounds like the role of the designer in this new type of organization should be larger. So I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about what is the roles of designers, of creatives, of people who are willing to try and fail and test, and any advice for us and how to.
Yeah, sure. So I was really lucky to work with Dave and Tim Brown and the guy Colin Burns and people when they were reinventing IDEO away from being just straight product into the amazing business which it turned into. Yeah. So I met Colin so the story, and I'm sure Colin won't mind you telling me that. Colin, the way I met Colin was I was doing a workshop on projects. And Colin was in the audience, Colin Burns, who was one of the directors in the UK, and through him I met Tim Brown and all the others. Yeah, so I was lucky to work with IDEO, and I was involved in transforming the business when they became the great business they are. So I worked and David and Colin Burns was my first contact point in the UK. The way I met Colin was I was teaching at a workshop and Colin was in the audience. What had happened to him was in his studio, two of his people, he'd come out and almost found them at blows. And what was that about? One of his colleagues had said, I think they're fighting because they're seeing the world differently. And I've heard this chap talking about different types of projects, which is what I just explained to you. Maybe we should go and see whether he's got any ideas. So that's how I got into the IDEO thing. So they came to my workshop. And just like I've explained to you, I explained how people have a mental model of how projects should work. If it's a foggy project, if it's paid by numbers and you're doing agile, you're nuts. So that thing about matching reality is really important. So that's how I got into it. And so I worked with IDEO. And then about the same time, I got approached by the Design Council in the UK. And they were looking for communicate design. And I helped them with that at Pentacle, my business school. So we showed them, because before they were going to companies saying, we do design, it's very good, please buy. Okay, you can't do that. You got to start from their needs. So I did a lot of that as well. And then I ended up on the board. But as a result, most designers don't know about, their brains, because types of change, breaking things into chunks, that language is all from my books. They don't know this. And even things like the double diamond. So I love big intel inside. Anyway, okay. So I wanted to transform organizations from caterpillars to butterflies, and I'm dealing with old folk. You can teach them so much, but to make the transformation, as human beings, most of our history, we've not been talking. We've been acting ourselves into understanding. If you go to a foreign country and they say, in this country, we sit cross-legged, you just sit cross-legged. And initially you go, wow, that's weird. By the time you finish your holiday, you go, oh, wow, I really love sitting cross-legged, because you've learned it and you've worked your way into it. I was going to create a world where people could do butterfly. Okay. They would act it out. They would have all the culture. And as a result, they could transform. So turns out that things which are useful are, for example, like design thinking, because you build that into the culture of my super real world is called Cube.
Yeah.
So that people are learning, they're workshopping there, and that's a crucial part of it. There are other elements of the culture, like talking sticks. So we have things like spin casting, so everybody gets a chance to talk. So I've tried to combine all the things I understand, make it possible to be a good butterfly in this world. So when you put on your headset, this type of headset, not the silly ones, okay? And you enter and you meet other people, they're doing new behaviors. Because, as I said, we look around, everyone else is doing new behaviors, everyone joins in. So we go, we're doing a business case. Let's do a gap leap. Let's do a gap leap. And you go, I don't know what a gap leap is. Oh, yes, a gap leap. You pretend you join in. And once you've done 2 gap leaps, you now know how to do a business case in 7 minutes. You take your headset off, go around your office, get a flip chart, and you do a gap leap. And I've just transformed you.
Great. That's awesome. By the way, you keep saying my super real
world. Okay. So everyone knows about virtual reality. Everyone knows that. It's the gaming stuff. Everyone knows about augmented reality, XR, etc., etc. So I'm going to be rude and somebody will shoot me, but all of those things, they are entertainment.
Right.
Okay, VR, you go there and it's a consumer product. You put on your headset, your handset, and you watch the turtles, okay? Maybe you can touch a turtle, but you and I can't stand at a whiteboard and brainstorm, and then you're drawing it whilst I'm typing the PowerPoint and we're talking to each other, and 2 seconds later, something comes out.
Right.
That's the butterfly culture we want. That collaboration, co-creation, leadership, moving around the team. You want it to be flat so that the hierarchy doesn't dominate. Good ideas can bubble to the top. You want enough broken up spaces. We have rooms, we call them cubicles, so people can work on different things in different places and not just suffer internet, everyone being rude to them. Yeah. So that's what we do. And then, of course, because you're on a computer, if you're working on stickies, everyone can read them. But of course, you can do things like browse the stickies. Or if you and I can't meet, I can come in and leave me a little message and say, hey, hi, Eddie, come and etc. So all those elements are possible. And that's what I've called super reality. So it's an empowering, enabling version of reality, not a consumer or an overlay or a let me just tell you what this pizza shop sells type of thing. It's a consumer.
Yeah. And you were well ahead of your time there, because right now there's a couple of startups that are starting to do similar things like spatial.
Yes, that's right.
Meeting VR and immerse, but they're all very new and still.
Yeah, I wish them well, because it's important the world should change and they have to have a new world mindset. Otherwise, what they'll do, avatars. We talked about avatars. Can I just close the loop?
Sure.
When you go on Cube, first thing you notice is it looks really boxy. I mean, the whole thing, it's very retro. So walls look like walls, doors look like doors. We model it on like a British house. So it's got like dado rails and funny parquet floor and stuff like that. Because we know everybody knows those things. So your brain just discounts them.
Right.
If you go into VR, it's always like the individual grass things moving. Which one should I look at? And funny colors and bubbly avatars and stuff like that. And it's eating up all your brain. We're into learning, execution, and co-creation. You don't want your brain to burn on any of those things.
No.
The second thing is the avatars have square heads, a little smiley, okay, right, and square bodies and no arms. People always say to us, that looks so basic. Why don't you make a real bird? When are you going to laugh? We often get told off because they think we're behind. But when we started, we had humanish avatars, like the one you created. They are so bad for learning or anything because first the introverts don't want to do it. And then imagine that I was actually slim and good looking as opposed to fat and not so good looking as I am, okay? Now I have to make my own avatar. I'm not comfortable with myself as I look. Do I create a slim avatar or do I create it as I am? No, a serious question. Which one do I do?
I have no idea. I think Apple probably did the right thing with the Memoji where you couldn't make the Memoji any fatter or thinner.
But that's a mistake because then everyone's thinking, I know Eddie's a fat bastard. Well, I said bastard, I know. He's a fat bastard. Look at him, he's got the emojis, looks like everyone else. Chairs? They don't have wheelchairs. I've never seen a VR thing where your avatar is in a wheelchair. Never, ever. But some people, that might be their identity. So we've gone really simple. It takes away hierarchy. It stops you importing all the biases. So normally if you see an avatar, which looks like your old geography teacher you hated, so all that bias stuff gone, openness, engagement. And it's really funny because people say, oh, you're very far behind the curve. We go, you're probably not going to be a client there because you just don't get it. The ones who get it go, why have you got? You see? And then we go, curious minds. And then we explain it to them. And they go, oh, yeah, you're right. You don't need the webcams because you're not looking at each other. And yeah, it's much easier just to look at shapes which are all the same and concentrate on the work rather than how does that person's avatar look.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So I love to finish the interview with this question. So in his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton describes the difference between a lecture and a sermon. A lecture is there to give you a little bit of information, and a sermon is there to change your life. And I want to give you a stage for a short sermon, but I'd like you to maybe to not make it too easy, not directed necessarily at business people or managers, but at individuals who have to live in this post-midnight world. What is one thing that they could really do differently that would really change their lives for the better?
Yeah. So we live in a world now which you'll recognize. It surprises us. Think about COVID. It frightens us. Every headline is juicy. Often our roles, our jobs are complex, and our families may not be in the same place. There are a number of things which don't change. One is 1 second happens every second. The other thing which doesn't change is that you have always been alive. If you think back, you were a baby. Before that, you were a single cell. Before that, you were in your parents. They were in their parents. So we're all the same age everywhere in the world. We're just different representations of a very brief consciousness which we get to live for ourselves. And it's brief because we've been alive for billions, maybe trillions of years. And yet you get 70 years if you're lucky, 80, 90, 100. Well done. So that's all you're going to get. So how do you own it? See, when the world was slower, we had time to, the seconds to understand, to connect, to spend time with our family, to grow. You could go from being a child to a teenager to an adult. You knew what the break lines were, going to big school, putting on long trousers. You could transition from your little school where you knew everyone were confident, slowly into a bigger world. And you were quite safe in that big world because if there were bad actors, there were also good actors, and the good actors could act and they were easy to see. And so things jogged along. But over the past 20, 30 years, for a start, it's hard to be in charge of your own life. I don't know whether you've noticed, but how hard it is to hold your own opinion, or how hard it is not to get swept up and repeat what other people have said. I'm sure you've seen headlines and you've been dying to tell someone else.
Yeah.
If you see a headline which is remarkable, I have some really bad news for you. It's probably false. Do you know how I know that? Because remarkable things are like lightning strikes. You don't see them in the news every day. So if you're seeing anything which is that juicy, somebody's made it up. And remember what I explained about the fact that as a human being, you said it feels right, feels like being fooling you. If something comes along, you recognize it, you're happy. If it's different from what you're thinking, you decide it must be wrong, you're right. So to have control of your life, you have to do a number of things. The first is beware. It's very easy to get caught in a delusion. It's happened in history, all the way through history, Salem witch trials, and the list goes on. But these days, you're likely to get caught because of three things. One, the science of persuasion is really good. And they've added AI and neuroscience. The AI knows which words to choose, which are juicy, which you'll want to repeat. So you can get caught in someone else's delusion quite easily. The second thing which you have to look out for, also really crucial in this particular environment and day and age, is the fact that to a large extent, Nicholas Nassim Taleb describes this. You know how if you go on a plane and one person can't eat nuts, no one else can eat nuts.
Right.
So we've learned that if you're intolerant, and it's still just you and there's 10 million people, as long as you're stubbornly intolerant, you always win. So that's something else to pay real attention to, because often we'll see things happening in the social narrative and we'll join in. And it may be, remember I said the upside and downside down parallel? So just watch out for that and you get caught in someone else's delusion. And it's not something you set out to do. Okay. Then the third way in which we get dragged into people's delusions is quite simply because we don't do our homework properly. When somebody suggests something, instead of saying, if that's happening here, then it must be happening everywhere in the world. It's a very brief bit of consciousness. It's taken billions of years to get to you. It's your responsibility to make this brief bit of consciousness really fantastic for you and for everyone else also. That's what you've got to do. But don't let someone else burn up your brief period of consciousness.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to support it, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast app or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We run design sprints all over the world, and our goal is to improve outcomes, whether in business or various organizations, through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone. See you next week on Remake.